Can I start the video?
I've let all people in now. You will start in the waiting.
Yes, Niyati.
Organized by National Scientific Committee of Intangible Cultural Heritage, ICMOS India. Historic towns, large and small, along with their natural and built environments, are documents that embody the values of traditional urban cultures, providing distinct identity. While traditional skills create the built fabric, historic towns provide space to intangible aspects in form of crafts, practices, rituals, and local festivals. There are a lot of discussions about the interrelationships of tangible and intangible within these historic towns, but on ground, their holistic management is indeed a challenge. One of the reasons is also the lack of understanding of the complexity and pervasiveness of intangible values and of their relationship with the built fabric. The E-Symposium has been conceptualized to discuss historic towns to answer some key questions. 1. How do symbiotic association and multiplicity of values work on ground in context to the interrelationships of intangible to the tangible in historic towns? 2. How to augment the role of ICH for sustainable heritage management of historic towns. South Asia consists of various regions with overlapping histories and culture, with heritage rooted in their landscapes through rituals and traditions. This E-Symposium intends to look into intriguing questions by bringing together experts and emerging professionals from South Asia, aiming to identify good practices in the management of historic towns and the issues of commodification of ICH in terms of tourism and its role in the economy of these towns. Thank you. We look forward to your participation.
Kritika, please start.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Are we on Facebook Live?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Greetings to all our esteemed guest speakers and participants. I, Kritika Mohan, Conservation Architect from Assam, welcome you all on behalf of ICMOS India E-Symposium on Intangible Cultural Heritage for Sustainable Management of Historic Towns in South Asia, Theory to Practice, being organized by National Scientific Committee on Intangible Cultural Heritage, an emerging professional working group, ICMOS India, with Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, and Department of Architecture, IIT-PHU, Varanasi, as knowledge partners. This E-Symposium intends to serve as a platform for sharing and exchange of ideas that supports to develop insights on the interrelationships between tangible and intangible elements, especially in context of historic towns and the approaches for good practice in South Asia. Spaced out into 5 thematic sessions, this symposium intends to bring together experts and emerging professionals from South Asia. Today, we have with us our esteemed speakers, Professor Fawzia Hussain Qureshi, President ICMOS Pakistan, Ms. Dechin Sharing from Bhutan, Dr. Neelkamal Chaudhary, Director, Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, Niyati Jikyasu, and Shreya Shudev from India. Dear speakers and participants, thank you again for being part of this webinar. Now I request Dr. Riva Hoja, Vice President, ICMOS India, to formally welcome the speakers and the participants. Dear participants, let me introduce our Vice President to you. Dr. Rima Huja is a renowned archaeologist, historian, and a writer. Presently, she is Director of Maharaja Savai Man Singh II Museum City Palace, Jaipur, Director of Jaipur Public Charitable Trust, Member of Central Advisory Board for Archaeology, Managing Trustee of Jaipur Virasat Foundation, and also visiting professor to SP Delhi and CH and Ahmedabad University, and former member of India's National Monument Authority. She also has a number of books to her credit. Dr. Huja, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Kritika. And formality is never my best thing, but I would like to welcome all of you participants and eminent speakers to the kickoff of our very exciting series, which the National Scientific Committee for Intangible Cultural Heritage and the EPWG group, and of course, Kritika, you've already mentioned our knowledge partners, are together putting forward now. Intangible cultural heritage, sustainability, management, historic towns and issues facing them. In themselves, they're all such vital aspects that we are dealing with every day. They're critical to contemporary society. And then when you come to intangible heritage, the nature of it in itself is particularly transient. It's challenging, whether one is a professional in the field or you're just a concerned citizen looking at what is happening in the world around you. In fact, the intangible aspect is there for so many professions, even though the practitioners, say in medicine or other places, don't often think of it. And they'll say, things like the heritage we don't quite understand. Heritage is around them. The intangibility is around them. What as I had said earlier, the impermanent, the transient, the transformative almost aspect is always there. But this whole period during the COVID lockdown has, on the one hand, brought us closer together through mediums like where I'm having more than my 3 minutes under the sun, but also has given us an opportunity during lockdown, even in the other countries in the South Asian area, to sit back and think about how much is being lost, but at the same time, how much is being, we're attempting to recover by coming together the way we are today. As a lapsed archaeologist and a so-called historian, part of my professional career has often kind of skirted around this issue of the understanding and incorporating the intangible of different centuries, different eras, cultural manifestations into the material, more solidly tangible remains, monuments, epigraphs, manuscripts, art objects, ways in which the physical is left to us over the centuries. And I mentioned the lapsed archaeologist bit, I like that phrase, but I'll stick with that. Aspects like ethnoarchaeology, in which you try to understand possible, and I'm kind of trying to say possible in capitals because I'm not saying it's identical, but you understand possible past practices in the light of known contemporary ones. So there are so many aspects which lead the intangible to getting spotlit, but we often miss it. I grew up in a Jaipur that I know Poonam has also worked here. Shikha Jain is still working. Lots of people are working in this area. And one of the things that was very much in your face as you came into the old walled city were the flower sellers who sat around the large squares, the chalks, the choppers. And every time someone in the government, not all of them, but most of them, try and clean up the city or tidy up the city, they say that, these squatters should go. And yet those flower sellers, they link up to a much larger aspect of life in a city, in a historic town, which is what we're going to be talking about. In fact, one of my current pet interests, and for a long time it's been a pet interest, so I don't know if you can call it current, is how those very tiny beads from the Kutch area which are found on Harappan pottery. In fact, they're often found embedded in pottery as a decoration, but you also find them on the clothes of the local people. In the 40s, a lot of people were wearing them fashionably. Look at the movie stars of that period, you'll find women wearing them. Now, that is something which has a particular period linked with it, but it doesn't at the same time have a period linked with it, because it's something that was known 3,000 years before the current era, but it is also known in the 20th century or the 21st century much more in an exotic way. So it's intangible thought process taking a tangible manifestation at times. I also feel that there is so much that, I'm looking forward actually to getting out of here and hearing all the speakers with their insights on how we're going to bring the intangible cultural heritage of for sustainable management of historic towns in South Asia from the theory to the practice, because my aspect is all in the air. It's not thought through. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I would definitely take this opportunity to once again say to all of you, whether you are like me, and I'm going to hang up my earphones in a minute and be the listener, whether you are a participant who is going to be practicing what we are all collectively preaching, or you're a participant who is very much on the cutting edge, or you're someone who is just interested. This aspect of life across the globe, the intangible cultural heritage, are towns which are which are rapidly losing the aspects which make them special, the sustainability issue. All of these are going to come together, meshed, not just in today's session, but in the next couple of days as we go through, more than a couple of days as we go through. And it is indeed for me a privilege to be near the kickoff time, to be sitting here and welcoming all of you to what will be, I think, something that needs to be published very soon. So let's hope we can do that. But in any case, something that we will be talking about, talking through, and taking more than we will be taking it out, I hope, from just a discussion place to a place where we will be practicing it, but also to the larger audience around us. Thank you once more for having for giving me this opportunity of welcoming you all, eminent speakers, participants, and to say my thanks to the organizers at this point. Now it's over to you all, but I assure you, I'm going to be enjoying myself. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request Dr. Neelkamal Chapagi to welcome the guest as representative from Support Institute, Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University. Dear guest, Dr. Neelkamal is an architect and heritage professional from Nepal, currently director of Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University in India. We are thankful to him for having agreed to the institutional collaboration and his unflinching support to the organizing team throughout the deliberations for the conduct of the webinar. So,
thank you, Kritika. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, and also our collaborative team from ICMOS India, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this event. It's also a privilege for the center to join ICMOS India, the ICH National Committee, but also the Emerging Professionals Group to work together in symposium. I must say that much of the hard work is done by the Young Emerging Professionals Group, and we are supporting mostly on the knowledge, but also the publication part of it, which should come out after the series of webinars are over in the coming few weeks. At this point, I would just like to introduce you, those of you who may not be familiar with our center. The Center for Heritage Management at Ahmedabad University is an academic center which primarily runs a master's program in heritage management, from which I see some students and many graduates as part of the Emerging Professionals Group here. including the organizers here. We have been in this journey for last almost 8-9 years now, working on both the tangible and the intangible, but also nature and culture to bring these domains together for the better heritage management in future, and particularly producing or preparing heritage professionals for future. So this is a journey that is full with challenges, which is not easy to do. However, with partners like ICOMOS India and many other organizations in India and across the world, I think this has been a wonderful journey, and we are slowly making progress towards a holistic heritage thinking and a better management approach, and not only in India, but perhaps in South Asia and beyond. So it is really my privilege to be with all of you here. And once again, I would like to welcome you, and I look forward to all the deliberations, particularly the case studies that are going to be presented today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Mrinalini Atre, Coordinator of NSC ICH member, Coordinator of India Chapter, Association of Critical Heritage Studies, to introduce National Scientific Committee on Intangible Cultural Heritage and acquaint us with the activities of NSC.
Thank you, Kritika. Good afternoon to all of you, and greetings from National Scientific Committee on Intangible Heritage and Emerging Professionals Working Group, ICOMOS India. Dear eminent speakers and participants, our committee, which is a team of 42 members with 8 members at International Committee for Intangible Heritage, the committee has been following its objectives of not only documenting and safeguarding ICH, but at the same time, we are also disseminating knowledge about the same in public domain through seminars and workshops. And since last 2 years, the committee has hosted a number of such programs in collaboration, like the one on Bihu Festival, which was in collaboration with International Committee on Intangible Heritage and Northeast Zone ICOMOS India. Let me tell you, it was the first of its kind which was done on folk festival. We also organized a webinar titled Crafts Resilience under ICOMOS International Webinar Series. It focused on the journey of resilience as embedded in the traditional knowledge and skills of the crafts communities as critical part of ICH. May I also share with you that we have a working group within the ICH committee, which is led by Niyati Jigyasu and Madhura Dutt, and they have been involved in making a comprehensive inventory framework, which can be used by professionals and researchers for ICH documentation. The group is also working in creating an online repository of ICH in India by collating and compiling existing inventories on ICH within India. And this would help us to get detailed information about the ICH elements, their significance, and their importance to the practicing communities. And also, this information would also help the committee of ICH to assist the government and other organizations in policy making. Dear speakers and participants, and this present e-symposium is also one such effort in this direction of Team ICH to take into consideration the other aspects of ICH, and that is the intangible association of historic towns, the interrelationships between the tangible and the intangible. And I have no doubt that with the exchange of ideas and brainstorming, which begins today and would continue in the successive thematic sessions over the next 2 months, we will not only deliberate over the existing theories, tools, and paradigms in this sector of knowledge, but we will also find a future direction in this field. I also take this opportunity as an NSC ICH coordinator to welcome our experts from Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, and India for today's thematic session. And I must thank you because you all readily agreed to our invitation, and this seminar has become a reality. Thank you all, and thank you ICOMOS Executive Committee for all the support which they have extended to us for the making of this seminar. Thank you. Thank you, Kritika.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we come to the real brainstorming session. And for the purpose, I hand over the platform to Poonam Verma Mascarenhas, moderator of the session today. Let me introduce to Poonam Verma. She is Scientific Council Steering Committee member of ICOMOS India, an architect, building conservation consultant, researcher, and writer. Poonam is the founder and director of the Goa-based award-winning studio, Arkinova Environs, bringing together 3 decades of domestic and international experience. She is the co-founder of Goa Heritage Action Group and also serves as a Senate member of SPA Vijayawada. As a Charles Wallace Fellow, she was a consultant to Intact Jaipur for the conservation of 22 listed sites comprising temples, fort walls, cenotaphs, stepwells, gates, reservoirs, and the design of heritage walks at Jaipur Amer under the ADB-funded RUIDP projects. Her studio has revitalized numerous Goan heritage homes and privately owned palaces in Rajasthan, and also contemporary buildings, and won numerous awards, including Best Green Project of 2014. Since 2016, she has been the Cultural Heritage Management Expert for ADB-funded IDIPT projects in Himachal Pradesh, where her projects include rehabilitation of Shimla Town Hall and conservation of historic urban precincts and buildings in Mandi town, comprising temples, ghats, Victoria Bridge, and the rehabilitation of Vijay High School. She has to her credit many national and international publications. The recent being that Heritage of Panaji, Goa 2017. Thank you, everyone. Poonam ma'am, please come.
Thanks so very much, Kritika. Wonderful to be here. Let me begin by sharing my thoughts. It is my belief that human eye can discern between craftsmanship of love and that of utility. I also believe that while we professionals can discern, however, face the difficulty in acknowledging the love of labor. We are motivated by the emotional hook, but then our training instructs us to scientifically approach our chosen subject, perhaps to balance out the subjectivity. Is it the only way, or can there be another that includes and builds on the belief system without prejudice? What would be the impact of such an approach on practice? Will it further alienate the decision makers and the mainstream practitioners? Or can it pave way for the myriad stakeholders to participate in the caretaking? Perhaps that is the core idea to explore, more so in South Asian context. Just like you, I too am looking forward to today's discussion, first of many as has been conceived by the National Scientific Committee on Intangible Cultural Heritage of ICOMOS India, and I congratulate them. A lot of hard work has gone into it. Let us collectively explore the realm of intangibles in the tangible and sustainable management of historic towns. With these explorative thoughts, let us welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Neel Kamal Kampane. Dr. Neel Kamal is an architect and heritage professional from Nepal, currently the director of Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University in India. He is part of the team delivering online courses for UNESCO. One is on Sustainable Heritage Management Foundation Program for UNESCO Bangkok, and another on the Intangible Cultural Heritage for Living Heritage Unit, UNESCO Paris. He serves as an editorial board member of the Journal of Heritage Management as an executive committee member for the Association of Critical Heritage Studies, as an executive board member for Asian Academy of Heritage Management, and a bureau member of Asia Pacific Higher Education Network for Intangible Cultural Heritage. Today he is our keynote speaker, joining us from Nepal, and will be sharing with us case studies, a few reference images to start with, and then we'll touch upon importance of ICH in urban heritage conservation. He has brilliantly titled his talk as Tangible, Intangibles, and Intangible Tangibles, Nuances of Concepts and Practices on Heritage Towns. Let us now welcome President Neil. Please take over.
Thank you, Poonam. Thank you, organizers. Now I wear my hat from being from Nepal. So greetings from Nepal. Good afternoon. Welcome to you all again. As Poonam mentioned, I am currently speaking to you from Nepal, my home country. Let me begin without further ado. I will share my screen and I hope you can see it. Yeah, so the title that I have given for the talk today is Tangible Intangibles and Intangible Tangibles. And by this, I want to provoke thinking that perhaps there is a confusion, there is a bit of overlapping, there is a bit of dissonance. So anything might happen. So that's the sort of thoughts that I would like to share, particularly in terms of what we do with managing our historic towns from theory to practice. That would be my effort. But I cannot help myself but to connect to the present context where all of us are under this slogan, stay home, stay safe. I know India is unlocking up rather perhaps, but in Nepal, we're still under lockdown. So when we are stay home, stay safe in this mode for last more than a year now, on and off, these questions keep coming to my mind. I'm not going into detail because I'm still struggling with these questions. But the question I have is, as an architect, how do we understand the concept of home? And if I expand it to a city, a town, or a neighborhood, how do we understand? Because no matter how we have defined, in the past 1 year and few months, we have seen that people are actually panicking of being trapped in home. So what is this relation between people and their home? And similarly, the residents and their city? This is a question that I'm pondering upon. I don't have an answer yet, but this is something that the pandemic lockdown triggered in my mind, which I'm still grappling with. And it is where I am going to also wonder whether this idea of intangible cultural heritage can help us capture this relationship between people and home, which perhaps we missed out in our past practices, or perhaps current architectural, urban planning, and heritage management practices might have overlooked, or maybe we are trying. So that's one question. And the second is, can this idea of intangible cultural heritage provide some guidance for better interventions in our historic towns? Now, this is with regards to the current situation or the situation that we have been in the past 1 year, where pictures like this have come across all over South Asia. This is a picture from Nepal, migrants fleeing from Kathmandu on road. You can see, women, children, all people. This has bothered us for the past 1 year. And I would like to connect this to the heritage conservation movement, particularly in the Kathmandu Valley. That's our major urban center in Nepal. This is an old picture where restoring a public rest house. But I wonder whether restoring these wonderful historic monuments, we have only restored the timber carved members and the brick and the mortars, or have we also restored the concepts behind this? These are essentially rest houses meant for people like this who would be walking on the streets to take shelter. But during this pandemic, I didn't see any of these our historic legacy heritage structures coming to rescue of any of the migrants. I didn't see this heritage serving any purpose for the human crisis. And therefore, I asked this question, what are we doing today? And I then read history. Kathmandu Valley, which has 5 World Heritage properties listed, including this one from Patan, has restored many of these monuments even after the 2015 earthquake. But I had found that in history, the same valley also had this concept of quarantine, and these kind of public structures were actually built in the entry points of the city to help people who had gone for trading in India and in Tibet, and when they would come back, they would actually quarantine themselves in these public rest houses. Where are those concepts now? We have all forgotten them. And this is where I feel we have lost something in this heritage restoration process, because this is one of the few sites from Asia to be listed in the World Heritage Property list from the very beginning in the 1979. However, we have missed out on this very important legacy of our own heritage and history. We also are very rich in very many intangible cultural practices, like many of the jatras, the chariots festivals, where you see these bits and pieces of the chariots being assembled, disassembled, and perhaps put into these kind of structures. So you see the intangible and the tangible always working together. However, I must admit that our official narratives, our World Heritage drives, our official policies have perhaps not seen this coexistence of the tangible and intangible. And therefore, Kathmandu Valley again and again comes into discussion towards being put into the World Heritage list in danger. And very nicely, very diplomatically, we keep away from that question. We avoid that listing into the World Heritage list in danger. But by doing that, we're not doing service to ourselves, because we have not recognized this relationship, and we're running away from this challenge, this crisis. This intangible cultural heritage not only connects the tangible with the intangible, but also connects many parts of the city's traditions, the urban planning principles, into the natural resources. The connection between the culture and the nature, that has been a major drive in the global heritage discourse today, has been there enshrined when the cities were evolved over centuries, when these traditional practices, the jatras, the festivals were formulated and practiced and are still being practiced. And perhaps we have ignored them. So my observation from Nepal, in very brief, is we have wonderful World Heritage sites. We're also party to the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention. However, we don't see these two things coming together, and this is a big observation. From an urban setting of Kathmandu, I'd also like to briefly take you to a remote area in Nepal, which is also in a tentative list. This is the tentative World Heritage Site of Lomantang, which is a walled city. Here, my interest preliminary as an undergraduate student in architecture was to study urban architecture, how people would build with mud. But then while as an architecture student I was studying, I also found these wonderful traditions. Never in my study, these traditions were illustrated as a part of understanding architecture or urban planning. And this is where later on, when I started my undergraduate studies, I was doing research, I was looking at urban architecture as my focus. I was looking at the practices of building with earth all across the world, not only in Nepal, the Trans-Himalayan part of Nepal, but also in other parts. I hope you see my video also. I hope it's visible. Let me just confirm the sound. Yes. So what I found during my research about urban architecture is this wonderful song and dance that were actually part of building process. Let me just show you a few clips here. So what you are seeing here is, this is a restoration project that's happening in Lhasa. Actually, I visited Lhasa to study urban architecture practices, and this is they're making a mud roof.
It's only like this. It's happening something like in the very smooth.
So how long does it take to make this roof?
At least 15-20 days.
Wow, every day they are doing like this?
Like this, you see, with the front of this stone.
Yes. Please note the song, the rhythm of their ramming the earth, and the dance as well. So 18-20 days they are just doing like this.
Like this. They make this very
But they start with like little.
And around 5 days.
Okay.
You see with the strong. They have like these designs.
I'll stop here. So what you saw is sorry, I'm just trying to go back to my slides. Yeah. What you saw in that clip, which was taken, this was a video that I took during my research, when the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention was adopted by UNESCO, but had not yet come into force. So somewhere as a student, I had heard about this concept of ICH, but I was not sure how does it apply to my work as an architect, conservation architect. And that documentation of the building practices allowed me to think how understanding architecture is so much informed by these intangible practices, which might be captured just as the intangible cultural heritage of different elements of ICH, but actually it's a very much part of building process. Now we might miss it if we understand that built heritage only from a very conventional fabric-based approach, because fabric-based approach might not consider this song and dance and these processes as part of that. So, but then we have this values-based approach today when you think of intervention into historic towns, which emphasizes on values. But what is value? How does value connect to the intangible cultural heritage? And today there is also another concept called living heritage approach, where communities are also brought in when we do the values assessment. And I think this is where, in historical sense, I also see an evolution of our conservation practices, where perhaps intangible cultural heritage is also making entry into managing historic towns. However, I would like to step back again and go back to 1964-65 Venice Charter, which is celebrated as the milestone, but also have been heavily criticized for giving rise to this fabric-based approach. But I also wonder, in the very beginning, the preamble of Venice Charter actually refers to age-old traditions, as I mentioned here, right? And then it refers to the traditions and culture as very guiding principles for our conservation practices. However, moving forward in the coming decades, perhaps we somehow forgot that, and therefore ICOMOS comes up with several charters later on, including historic towns and all that. The World Heritage Convention comes, which again gives kind of push towards the tangibility, not so much an intangibility. But I must recognize here that the Convention on Biological Diversity is perhaps the first international instrument where the notions of ICH were enshrined as very important, as I highlight in this text here. The cultural practices are recognized as an important to protect biodiversity. And this convention does a good job. So I just want to recognize this. And then perhaps that has an impact. This is the same time around 1990s, where the World Heritage Convention comes up with the cultural landscape concept. Again, that concept is there to acknowledge the role of intangible cultural heritage, how it comes. However, one critique is that the cultural landscape only goes up to the associative approaches. It is not going into enabling approach or the creation approach. Okay, so there is some limit there. But again, the journey continues. There, the historic urban landscape approach being discussed. And in 2005, the revision of the World Heritage Convention, one actually sees that the World Heritage Convention in fact includes the various aspects of intangible cultural heritage to be part of the authenticity discourse. And this is a milestone. Now, remember, this is when already the ICH Convention is there. But the background of ICH Convention goes a little bit back to the recommendation on safeguarding of traditional culture and folklore, the living human treasure system that UNESCO had come up and did for some time, which then moved on to the proclamation of masterpieces of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. So these steps finally led to the Convention of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. And now the dilemma is that that convention has also come up with another set of lists. So the question is whether that list has actually given an impression that we have actually two parallel instruments. There is one for tangible, one for intangible. And my feeling is perhaps much of our professional practice is stuck in this duality, in this parallel track. I think that's perhaps a misconception. We also sometimes take extreme positions to either just emphasize intangible or just emphasize an intangible. I think that's also not the right approach. And what Harriet Deacon rightly makes an argument that perhaps we are inflating the terminology of intangible cultural heritage by mixing up what is intangible values and what is intangible cultural heritage. I think these are a few points we need to critically reflect upon in order to think what can we do to our historic towns by bringing in intangible cultural heritage. And in my opinion, since I'm running out of time, I will be brief here. I think the way forward is already indicated by the historic urban landscapes approach. There is some good lessons to look into that, but then I would also like to suggest that we should not treat ICH as just another layer in that urban setting. It's not just another layer. It's not just the icing on the top. It actually should be treated as both noun and a verb. because when you treat it as a verb, then it becomes the creator of the town, historic town, creator of the heritage. Okay, so it is in the conceptualization, building, operation, and appreciation of our towns. And therefore, I would like to argue that ICH is not merely a thing, but it's actually the soul of our historic towns. If that is the case, then what can we do? And I refer to Harriet Deacon, that we shall distinguish between intangible values and the intangible cultural heritage. But I would also see that no matter how vague is this idea of intangible cultural heritage, because the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention also recognizes vagueness, I see that vagueness as perhaps a necessity also, because there is this vagueness in the concept itself. And also we need to recognize that not everything intangible becomes intangible cultural heritage. So we need to be very careful about that as well. And therefore, if we consider ICH as an integral part, as a soul of our historic town, what that means is not to create just a decorative thing somewhere, or just a cosmetic approach to our historic town management, but we should think ICH as emphasizing on people, because the ICH is actually with the people. And that perhaps leads to a people-centric approach to managing our heritage, particularly in the historic towns. And I think that will allow us to negotiate between the state mechanisms, but also the local community mechanisms. And perhaps that gives rise to a collaborative or participatory regime. And I think that's what perhaps the ICH discourse can help in our heritage management. And this is where, if we understand ICH as a living heritage, I think it also helps us to move beyond this blame that heritage is stuck in the past, to move towards a very futuristic, that heritage is actually about present and about future. And therefore, to summarize, what I wanted to briefly mention is that the tangibles are also about intangibles. Intangibles are also about tangibles, and they are interconnected. There is no clear-cut boundaries here. However, we need to also recognize the necessity of seeing them as on their own as well. But then in this spirit, I think we should also see these global instruments, because what I observed in South Asia is perhaps we just refer to these instruments as in isolation, in their own silos, and that is something we need to address. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the wonderful cases later on. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Neil. Wow. I mean, in this short time to bring out the very essence of the dialogue, the as you said, the parallel lines. I think we are going to have a fantastic panel discussion. And thank you so much for bringing out each of those aspects very, very clearly. And let us now welcome President ICOMOS Pakistan, Professor Fawzia Hussain Qureshi. She is joining us from Lahore. Professor Fawzia graduated with Masters of Architecture from the MIT USA in 1980. She taught for 30 years at the National College of Arts and retired as a professor and a principal in 2011. As director of FHQ and Associates, she is engaged in conservation of environment, built heritage, planning, and architectural design. She has been part of the team involved in preparing the conservation and management plans for Lahore Fort, Shalimar Gardens, and Rohtas Fort. She has authored the book Bhutan, A Spiritual Legacy, and has contributed in numerous international books and journals. Today, Professor Fawzia will be sharing with us her thoughts on impact of politics on the intangible heritage of Lahore, city of Pakistan. Over to you, Dr. Fawzia. We are so eager to hear you.
Thank you so much, ICOMOS India, and everybody from India, and I welcome you all to our South Asian fraternity. It was indeed very, very heartening to hear the keynote speech by Professor Neil. And I would, without wasting any time, I would like to now share my screen for my presentation. Now. Oh dear. Can you help me out? Share screen. Kritika, can you help me out on this, please?
Ma'am, do you see the option share screen on your?
Yes, I do that. I've opened that. It
If-
says advanced sharing options. Only.
Ma'am, in the advanced sharing option, you will see a basic thing as well on the left. So if you can just go to that.
Okay, got it.
So when you go to basic, you will be seeing a few windows. And if your presentation is open, you will be able to see a window for your presentation as well.
Just a minute.
Ma'am, do you see a green folder with an arrow?
Just 1 minute, please. I'm just trying. Oh dear. Yes, I see share screen and paper for
a green folder. Do you see, ma'am?
I don't see a green folder.
The window that opens up, ma'am.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Is it visible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Perfect.
Now, how do I make this into a slideshow? I can't seem to put it into a slideshow.
Ma'am, could you click F5 on your keyboard? F5.
Yes, I just did that. I'm sorry, I'm taking all this time. Okay, let me just continue the way it is going. Is this visible to you all?
It is.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay, I'll be talking about a case study. My presentation is in two parts. One is talking about, in generality, the socio-political impact of partition on Pakistan in general and Lahore in particular. And the second part would be dealing with what is happening in the case of Lahore, the conservation plans that are in place, and some wonderful work on the tangible heritage of Lahore city that is ongoing currently by the Walled City Authority of Lahore. I don't want to go into this, but this is just a background. Historic cities are a repository of cultural heritage. There are private residences, semi-public buildings, urban spaces, and these are all associated with specific intangible heritage, as Professor Neil also pointed out in his presentation. But as cities grow over a period of time and land use patterns change, land associated with specific cultural values adapt to that change. Most of the cities in Pakistan have grown from small towns accommodating a few thousand population to sprawling cities. The historical cores of these cities have definitive living and land use patterns with specific communities residing within their own neighborhoods. Today, as cities increase in population and accordingly, the impact on the inner city land use patterns change. Historic precincts, for which we hold a certain nostalgia, are encroached upon. Old heritage buildings are pulled down for achieving higher density or an alternative use, which offers better returns, thereby changing the cultural and living patterns of inner cities. With this growth, we lose some age-old traditions, intangible, along with the tangible, which evolve and adopt the intangible to contribute to our links to our past, to the future, and to the future. Lahore, I just to take you back to the social history of Lahore pre-partition. Lahore was a multicultural religious society where Diwali, Holi, Eid, Nowruz, Basant, Bisakhi, Christmas were all celebrated with equal fanfare. Sikhism is very closely associated with the city, and it is here that we can recall the fourth Guru Ramdas, his Janam Stan is here. His son Guru Arjan was assassinated here. Lahore was also the capital of the Khalsa Empire of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So there are lots of associations which are associated with other religious communities that were residing in Lahore and were an equal participant, which today has changed post-partition. I'd just like to go back to the changes that were brought about in the times of the British annexation, when major changes in the overall morphology of the city changed, when the fortress walls were pulled down, a railway station was just built adjacent to the walled city, changing the overall dynamics of the transportation networks, and and there was a massive commercialization and trading that took over the walled city in particular. Massive wholesale markets opened up because of the presence of the railway station just adjacent to the walled city. At the time of partition, Lahore had over 700,000 Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus. Mosques, temples, gurdwaras are found in every neighborhood. Cultural life imbibed and respected. At the time of partition, 7 million Muslim refugees moved into West Pakistan. About 35% of Lahore's population, comprising Hindus and Sikhs, moved to India. Refugees settled in premises left behind by departing migrants. Havelis, residences were then subsequently, immediately, as a matter of fact, at the time of partition, were modified to accommodate multiple family units. A single house suddenly accommodated different refugee families on different floors of each portion of the Haveli or the house. Temples and gurdwaras were converted to residences by refugees due to lack of space or shelter. The population of Lahore from 700,000 within a year increased to over 1 million. Technological developments in energy and transport further changed the lifestyles and morphology of the city. Residential premises, there was a great pressure on commercialism, primarily due to new traders coming in. The Hindu and the Sikh traders had moved out, and there was a new set of trading community that moved in, and therefore residences had a lot of the traditional morphology, which comprised primarily residential units, began to change into commercial units. I'd like to quote something here. It's by Moni Mohsen, a renowned journalist whose father is an ex-student, was a student of HSN, a very esteemed public school. When my father returned to school in September, he was only one of the only 30 of the 300 boys who had left in April. The rest, Hindus and Sikhs, had gone. The school had lost many of its staff. There were more cows in the school dairy than boys in the classroom, he remembers. HSN was a haunted place. Now, this quote speaks volumes about how there was a major change in the overall scene in Lahore. Shah Alam Market, the largest whole-scale market in the city, which is dominated primarily by Hindu traders and businessmen, was burnt down, and it was witness to some of the worst riots at the time of partition. And it was soon after, in the early 50s, the road there was a major double boulevard, wide avenue that was created, bringing in vehicular traffic right into the center of the heart of Lahore. And this is the route, this is the main boulevard. And you can see the old city was primarily all very tightly packed, small lanes. But now we had a main boulevard entering directly into the heart of the city and changing the overall morphology of the city. Despite all these changes at the time of partition, Lahore still continues to be a cultural capital of Pakistan. It still manages to have all kinds of activities which can date back, which incorporate all the intangibles, ranging from food to sports, cuisine, markets. It's also the center of literature. We continue to hold literature festivals and dramas and theaters and so on. However, the city continues to grow. There is a move away from the walled city, which houses most of the old Lahore at the rate of 3.3%. And there's a tremendous commercial pressure on the walled city, and we find that the resident population begins to move out of the historic walled city as the residents' income improves and they move to the new developed areas of Lahore. Wholesale commercial warehouses start taking over major portions of the residential areas, bringing the resident population from about over 300,000 down to 150,000 population today. Even less, at times it's quoted now at 120,000. A lot of the ownership properties of the walled city today are disputed since partition, and those disputes have led to a certain amount of deterioration of the old tangible heritage of the old structures, and there is an illegal use of disputed properties. The new migrants do not associate with the culture or the built heritage of their new residences enough to prioritize the significance of the place. The next thing that politically has a major impact on the tangible and intangible heritage of Lahore is terrorism. And the decade of the 80s saw the war on terrorism, of terror. There was an influx of over 4 million Afghan refugees. It brought about a very different culture from what we in Lahoris are accustomed to. There was a Kalashnikov culture, there was sectarian violence, religious fundamentalism began to seep in, drug trafficking, smuggling became very much a norm. In the 1980s, there was a ban on music and dancing because of the political stand taken by the then dictator, General Ziaul-Haq. Basant was banned due to some issues related to accidents and so on, which I'll talk about later. And the walled city, from the original residents who were Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, the Hindus and the Muslims move out, the Muslims come in, and now there is a new, the Muslims who have done well for themselves move out, and we find that today the majority of the population of the walled city is Pashtuns and Afghanis. Globalization, of course, is yet another aspect which has changed and which is universal, of course, but it has definitely changed the overall ambiance and the morphology of cities. Pedestrian, slow-moving traffic as vehicular traffic, shopping styles have changed from community shops to shopping malls, including malls in the walled city, lifestyle changes due to technological developments, and there is a shrinking of open spaces in the overall city. The intangible heritage of Lahore, the dancing girls and musicians who are very much part and parcel of the walled city have moved out. Wrestling, which was a very prominent sport at that time, have left. Basant is banned. Kite and twine makers were deprived of their livelihoods, which was a very major income generating activity. Hakims have lost their customers to doctors. Storytellers today do not have the space to congregate with the community. Skills of traditional crafts, copper, wood weaving have given way to machine-made manufactured goods. Changes in modes of communication bring about a new lifestyle. I will now talk about a case study of the conservation of the walled city of Lahore. The works done by the walled city of Lahore Authority and the Ahan Center for Cultural Services has done some tremendous and excellent work and has come up with some amazing award-winning conservation works of the Shahi Hammam, the Wazir Khan Mosque, the Lahore Fort, and the Sujan Gully with its residences. There's a great focus on tourism promotion of festivals, competitions, tours are carried out. There is free guided tours that are going. There are competitions that are held, such as Kaun Banega Khaba Ustad, Lahore being a center of food. However, little impact is seen on the conservation of the intangible heritage. One of the primary reasons is that there has been a tremendous focus on the conservation of the built heritage. However, I just to go back to what the Walled City of Lahore Act states. I'd like to quote this. Under the Walled City Act of Lahore, 2012, one of the objectives is to plan, develop, and create an infrastructure to preserve the heritage of the walled city of Lahore by providing adequate access through streets, roads, safe pipelines for water, sewerage, as well as related electricity and communication networks, and promote tourism and cultural activity in the space as well. However, the Act has missed out the important role of addressing the community, the living heritage, as equal participants and primary beneficiaries of the process. There is no component within Tayyiba Batul, who's written a very excellent paper in which she says there is no component that identified all three dimensions, namely physical, spatial, social, and interaction. The Walled City Authority of Lahore has been unable to control the illegal commercialization. The land investments there are from non-residents, supported by land mafia and backed by strong political support. There is an absence of action that states possibly that there is some tacit permission for the land mafia to grow. There are challenges of land regulation and executive authority. When we look at the walled city today, which is commercialized, and there has been a massive change in the overall morphology and land use, we find that some of the issues that need to be addressed by the Walled City Authority is that efforts have to be made for retention of residents within the residential zones, discourage tenants who are primarily with commercial vested interests. 30% of the property of the walled city, like I mentioned earlier, are disputed, and illegal use and occupation continues unabated. For many years, there has been this matter that there should be special magistrates set up to address this issue, but so far none has been done. WCLA must stop the massive commercialization due to land mafia and its political support. The property values controlled by land mafia, who buys lands at inflated rates and constructs multi-storied plazas, as you can see in the visual next adjacent, and warehousing has to be controlled. Reduce the conflict between the communities. Am I out of time?
Yes, you are. Another minute.
Okay.
Another minute.
I'll just take another minute. We have to promote, community and tourism has been, we need to reassess the conservation as a process with inhabitants as equal decision makers and primary beneficiaries, as opposed to the external stakeholders, such as tourists and private companies. I will just draw some draw some notes on my conclusions for this paper. The urban morphology of the walled city reflects a certain specific lifestyle that has developed over centuries, which we are losing. The intangible culture is reflected. However, despite the fact that the WCLA has managed to conserve the tangible heritage, the socioeconomic and demographic patterns of the community have changed, causing immense damage to the historicity of the place. Tourism is being proposed, but the objective should be that outward migration of residents is curtailed, infrastructure, urban rehabilitation, and residential zones are improved. The effort should be to move the system towards political action against land mafias and corruption, land regulation and commercialization to address and eradicate unfair land holdings and constructions, and inculcate a sense of ownership, pride, responsibility within the community and create more awareness about issues such as waste management and pollution. Involving the local community at each level of innovation is absolutely necessary, as mentioned by Professor Neil in his keynote address. Thank you, and I apologize for taking so much time.
It's such a shame, the time, and so wonderful to hear you, Dr. Fawzia. Thank you so much for bringing so many elements which we do see in the similarity, and yet different regimes have different ways of dealing with similar problems, maybe. Our next speaker is Disaster Risk Management Specialist, Ms. Dishen Sharing, joining us from Thimphu, Bhutan. Dishen, welcome. She has a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from College of Science and Technology in Bhutan and pursued a Master's in Structure Analysis of Historical Monuments from the University of Padova in Italy and Czech Technical University in Czech Republic. Over the last 15 years, she has led projects on disaster risk management, climate adaptation and mitigation, hydromet services, infrastructure development, disaster risk financing, and conservation of heritage sites in Bhutan. Her experiences spans across project development, portfolio management, resource mobilization, and capacity building with strong client orientation, partnerships, negotiation skills, and track record of delivering results. From 2006 to 12, she worked with Royal Government of Bhutan on conservation of heritage sites, and then from 12 to 20, she has worked as a disaster risk management specialist with the World Bank Bhutan office. She is currently pursuing a master's in business administration and in parallel is working on DRM assignments. Today, we shall get to know from her of the challenges in integrating disaster risk management in conservation of tangible and intangible heritage of Bhutan. Over to you, Dishen. We are so looking forward to hearing you.
Good afternoon to everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just share my...
A little louder would be nicer. Yeah, if you can be a little louder.
Okay, yeah. Is this better?
This is better.
All right. So can you...
Yes, we can. Please.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right.
You're all set.
So good afternoon to everyone. I'll briefly talk about integrating disaster risk management in conservation of intangible and tangible cultural heritage in Bhutan. The picture that you're seeing is the Punakha zone in Bhutan, which is known to be one of the architecturally richest cultural heritage of the country, and also houses some of the country's most valued and sacred artifacts. And in my presentation, I'll briefly touch upon Bhutan's intangible and tangible cultural heritage, the nature of how it's interwoven, some of Bhutan's iconic cultural heritage structures that have been lost to disasters, and then touching a little bit upon Bhutan's built environment, the risk that we face, and then emerging challenges, and concluded with a brief summary of the presentation. So Bhutan's tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Bhutan is known for its cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, manifested through its rich architecture of the built environment, like the first picture that I was showing on the cover page of the presentation. The richness in terms of values of sacredness of the artifacts, scriptures, and so on in its religious temples and monasteries, its festivals and rituals, traditional dresses that enriches the social fabric of communities. Therefore, Bhutan's cultural heritage is integral to its development and conservation of cultural heritage, and is one of the 4 pillars of its development guiding philosophy, gross national happiness, for which I think Bhutan is quite popularly known for. Okay. Yeah. So Bhutan being located in a highly seismic zone and exposed to weather and water-induced disasters, like all other infrastructure, its cultural heritage sites face the risk from these hazards as well. The first picture shows the 16th century Wongdipadang Dzong, which was destroyed by a fire in 2012. The 16th century Punakha Dzong was severely damaged by the glacial lake outburst flood in 1994. As you can see, its location between 2 rivers. The 7th century very famous Taksang monastery known as the Tiger's Nest was destroyed by fire in 1998. One of the salient features of these heritage sites of Bhutan is also its location. Although these locations, it seems it's more from protective, being well protected by the environment itself, but it also comes with the challenge of accessibility during disasters. As you can see that in the first picture, when there was this fire, it was very difficult to access and have fire trucks go up. So the whole location itself creates a big challenge for these sites. So the picture on the left shows that while the elaboration of the traditional architecture differ from structure to structure, being most grand in the dzongs, which are also known as fortresses, and then the temples, and then regular houses, there is a unique architecture that makes them Bhutanese. Even for modern buildings, as you can see on the picture on the picture on the right side, that built using reinforced concrete, there is some form of the traditional architecture that is mandatorily included in its facade. So this is about the tangible and intangible cultural heritage of Bhutan's built environment. So Bhutan's traditional built environment, like many others, evolved in harmony and needs to adapt to the environment and social needs. This has also in itself has the skill development process and immense traditional knowledge of how things are done, like in building a structure. These skills of the artisans carrying forward Bhutan's rich architecture of its built heritage are recognized as intangible cultural heritage of Bhutan. The art of construction is an intangible cultural heritage that survives the traditional architecture. With introduction of new materials and technologies of construction, the traditional know-how is being diluted, in many cases leading to compromises in the safety and quality of construction. For example, with the introduction of using nails, the patience of the carpenters to do the intricate timber joinery works are fading. Since you can, if you are using nails, you can do it much faster. So this whole focus of doing timber joineries in how it was done traditionally is that is being lost gradually. And further challenges are brought about when mixing old ways of doing things and new technologies, not knowing how the buildings will behave. Something like, you're modernizing without really specializing, and then you really don't know how the building would react to say an earthquake. Of course, there are ongoing efforts to counter these challenges. For example, improving the understanding of behavior of traditional buildings through scientific studies. And then there are a number of skill development training programs for building professionals and artisans. But it seems we still need to have more of these countermeasures to ensure that while the architecture is conserved, but at the same time, the safety of the building is not compromised as well. Secondly, with the richness of values,
we seem to have lost you. We can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
We can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So secondly, with the richness of values, bring about strong attachments to the way of doing things. For example, offering butter lamps is one of the most common and valued traditions for us, with the motivation of warding off all darkness and ignorance. And then the zones especially are also used for dual purposes, like because it's the seat of the religious and the administrative centers in all the districts. So therefore, it brings about a high potential of fire risk. Coming to the use of butter lamps, however, recognizing that this poses a fire risk in almost all the zones and temples, now the butter lamps are offered in a structure outside the main structures. However, with little inventions like the one shown in the picture below, or without these, a few are still offered inside the temples. Efforts are being made to install web cameras, smoke detectors, and fire extinguishers in case something goes wrong. So, but although mitigated up to a certain extent, there is still some risk that needs to be looked into. And with our beliefs, since not offering any butter lamp in the temple, and for that matter, even in our own individual houses, is not an option, this is an area where we need to come up with absolutely risk-free interventions or options. Another aspect of disaster management of cultural heritage that I would like to touch upon is the post-disaster response and recovery phase of cultural heritage sites. From the past experiences, so during an emergency, there are immediate responders, but these immediate responders may not be trained in evacuating immovable assets. And in Bhutan's case, mostly it could be the artifacts like sacred statues, scriptures, mural, we call it kutangs, and then these are exacerbated by limited technologies, leading to further loss of values of movable cultural heritage assets. So in these cases, it's a loss of built heritage plus loss of movable assets. And in many cases, these are one of a kind and irreplaceable assets. So therefore, the loss to spiritual values and traditions brought about by such disasters, it really cannot be estimated in terms of monetary value, because there is a lot of human sentiments and beliefs attached to these assets that are lost. So therefore, there's an urgent need to put in place clear protocols for immediate response to cultural heritage disasters. You may not be able to avoid the whole disaster, but at least having the best of abilities to salvage whatever is possible. And that requires capacity building for specialized expertise to salvage movable assets. While we have quite a lot to tackle even in normal times, the new normal with COVID-19 is bringing about a different set of challenges, especially in conserving our intangible cultural heritage aspects that is kept alive in the social fabric of communities as a part of rituals, traditions, and responsibilities. Pandemics such as COVID-19 require physical distancing. And with this, there's an emerging risk to dilution of community vitality and traditions and culture. During the lockdown, for example, sometime in December last year, especially in the western part of the country, that's the time when every household conducts their annual puja or annual ritual. So therefore, when that could not be conducted because of the lockdown and the requirement for physical distancing, there was a lot of emotional stress because you're not able to do what you have been doing every year for in your entire life. And especially when you know that these are being done for the well-being of the family, and similarly rituals for the well-being of the community. And as humans, our own beliefs give us this strength, and not being able to do things that we believe helps to keep us safe, it causes a lot of mental stress in some ways. So therefore, as COVID-19 may not be the last pandemic of this nature, the need to raise awareness of doing things in harmony with necessary changes in living our lives with these emerging challenges may be necessary. On the other hand, how do we continue to conserve these traditions in situations like this is a big question that I think we need to start looking for answers. And in the conclusion, finally, from these few things that I've spoken about, I would just like to highlight that conservation of tangible and intangible cultural heritage go hand in hand, like how the skill of the artisans in our intangible heritage, that's our intangible heritage, is essential in conserving our tangible built environment. Secondly, building resilience is the responsibility of everyone, and it requires everyone's effort. Therefore, in enhancing the understanding of the value of cultural heritage is key to enhancing resilience of cultural heritage and to survive what we value now and pass it on to the next generation. Only when a person knows the value of something, he or she will have the drive to conserve it. For example, again, going back to our annual rituals, annual puja at home, in modern times, sometimes in some ways now it could also be seen as the time when family members come together, when you invite your neighbors and your relatives and good friends to your house. So in some way, there is this aspect of, the time of gathering attached to it. So if we lose the value of the intrinsic value of why do we conduct these rituals is lost over time and people don't understand it, the gathering perspective could overtake the importance of these. So as gatherings can be done in many ways, the whole purpose of doing rituals could be lost. But understanding that it's doing rituals, having these annual rituals is to rejoice a year that has passed, and praying for a prosperous new year with offerings to the Buddhas gives a very different meaning to why we do the rituals. So therefore, that's just one example, but for everything that we now say recognize as our tangible and intangible cultural heritage, it's very important to highlight the meaning of why it is important in our daily lives. And the last point is that with changing lifestyles, I feel that it's equally important to conserve, especially the intangible aspects of our cultural heritage, to recognize the intrinsic values of our cultural heritage, and most important, with the way that how we live our lives are changing. It's important to explore innovative ways of nurturing those intrinsic values in our lifestyle to be able to continue and pass it on to our next generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. In so little time, so much ground has been covered, and you have really successfully brought to us the real important challenge of keeping the cultural intangibles of the cultural heritage relevant in the present time. How do we address that? That's my takeaway from here, and we'll get back to these discussions. We now welcome our next two speakers who are presenting case studies. And we start with Niyati Tikyasu. She's an architect and a doctoral scholar from Chandigarh. She is an academic with more than 20 years of teaching experience at various institutions. She is a visiting faculty at Master's Degree course at UNESCO Category 2 Center, WW1 Dehradun. Niyati has also been a resource person for UNESCO's sub-regional inception workshop linking World Heritage Sites and local cultural assets through museums, information center, and creative industries, held in Malaysia in 2018. She was awarded a research grant from INTAC in 2019 for documentation under History, Evolution, and Sustainability of Living Heritage, examining the traditional lap crafts of Jaipur. She is currently completing her doctoral research that looks at the role of intangible component, as in traditional crafts, in conservation of historic urban areas. Very interesting. She is a member of ICOMOS India, INTAC, ACHC, and Council of Architecture India. Her talk is titled The Container and the Contained. case of stone crafts of historic city of Jaipur. Over to you, Niyati. So looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Poonam. And I'll just start with this thing. I think I'm having the same problem that I'm not able to share. Sukrit, can you help me out? I'm not able to share because it just it's stuck at that. Who can share only host and all
What does it
participants?
show on your screen? On the
it says who can share only host all participants.
Are you on the advanced?
Yeah, on the advanced this thing, and there is no other option which I can find.
I will check the settings.
Okay,
1 minute.
I found it. I found it. Sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I found it. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll be basically, the title is The Container and the Contained Case of Stone Crafts of Historic City of Jaipur. And though I'll be basically building up a little bit of story about the role of traditional crafts in historic urban areas, my main focus is just one single aspect in this one single craft and how its implication on the historic urban areas and especially the built fabric, trying to look at how the connections happen. So the reason why I say connotations is because the relationship between the container, and, that is a built fabric, and the contained, that is an intangible, is sometimes associational, sometimes contested, at times implied. It can, and it has an impact, direct as well as indirect. And as Madhurita puts forth, architecture is not the spectacle of the city, nor does it even comprise the single dominant image of the city. This is what I'm trying to put forward, is that when we look at especially some of these examples, the traditional crafts are the ones which actually define the identity, which give the streetscapes to these historic areas. And so it's always, it's one of the things which actually, you know, make the more, give a more defining element to this entire, to these areas. Historical narrative of most cities would reveal many factors as being responsible for the existence of the craft in a particular geographical location, how they continued forward, and there are, and all these finally impact the built environment also. And many a times the built environment also impacts these. So it's like a mutual relationship and not a single way entry. I would take the case of Jaipur. The reason I'm taking Jaipur is, of course, it's one of my case example, but it is also because it's one of the cities where a lot of work is also being done, whether we look at for intangible or tangible, a lot of policies are in place, a lot of things are being done at, you know, at the ground level. And still, I'm just trying to, you know, look at one aspect where we have a little, you know, disconnection, and why and how it actually happens. So Jaipur, as most of us would know, it's a major city in the northwest part of India. It was founded by King Savai Jai Singh in 1727 as a gridiron plan in a single phase. This was envisaged as a city for commerce and trade, a very important center. And that is the very reason why the craft people and the merchants were invited by the royal court at that time to come and settle down here. So whatever workplaces that they have here and their residential areas also, they were all part of the fundamental planning process, which system which happened at that given point of time. At the inception, Jaipur boasted of around 36 karkhanas, or the 36 karkhana, which we even today we say. These are basically production areas of artisans. So they were areas where artist people used to work, and it was like a group of them working for so many of these numbers that I, you know, the different crafts that I have put forth here. And they would mainly work for the royal court and the army. But of course, as you know, Mr. Khan also points out that, you know, a lot of these work also spilled out to the normal residents also and onto the street also. From all these, we have now about 1/3 of the crafts that we see today. So you have block printing, you have tateras, you have blue pottery, tutarkashi, which are some of the crafts which are seen today. Even though most of them did come on the invitation of the royal court, they do have their own trajectory and narrative stories of how they came here, how they developed, what, whether they have any technological continuation to it, and how do they take it forward. Though this block printing, the one which I am showing on the top, and one of the things that I'm wearing also, that it is not part of the Jaipur, it's done very near to the town, but it's still, Jaipur is a very important market for it. So it has its association in that way. As I would like to, quote Tim Ingold here, where he says that the skills are neither innate nor acquired, but grown, incorporated into the human organism through practice and training in an environment. So traditional crafts are also not just about the skills and knowledge, but are about the practice over generations within a particular socio-cultural context, as well as a particular physical context. They are part of the basic traditional planning. They are significant in terms of the physical spread and the footprint. So what are the associations? This is where I would like to, stress a little on exactly what role I'm looking at, or what are the associations that I'm looking at, which are also symbiotic in nature because one affects the other. So first is, of course, the artistic value and the cultural identity of the city as the imagery of the city is characterized by the craft products and their activity. Second is a spatial architectural association in terms of planning systems, typology of historic built fabric, streetscapes, all correspond to the craft and the need of the processes. For example, if you look at this courtyard typology, which is used by these tateras, the brass metal workers, the courtyard is very important for them because the heat is disseminated, from the middle for all some of the processes that they do. So all the craft have a specific kind of a build form, and which is associated to the kind of work that that is part of the crafting. Also, it is not just about the physical form, but also the sound of the making, a sound that is part of the memory, imagery, a wayfinding for locals, visitors alike. The areas with stone carvers, metal workers can be identified from far by the sound that they make. It also has a very strong socio-cultural association as a sense of identity for the craft persons, as well as a consumer who associates the artifacts with certain ritual, practice, or at times even day-to-day life. Like you have this puppetry, which is a very important performing art, which is dying as far as Rajasthan is concerned, but it's still a very important art in the cultural sector. Then you also have you have these tie and dye threads, which are actually used for certain ceremonial rituals, and that is what you can actually see on the top. So, and all this finally becomes part of the economy of the historic areas, including raw materials, production and sale. And all this comes within the setting of the urban areas. What I'm going to talk about is the Khazane Wala Rasta, which is actually the place of the stone carvers. They have been into this for generations, and initially it was only on this Khazane Wala Rasta that you can see here, and it is like the secondary roads. You have the main arterial roads of the Jaipur, and then you have the secondary lanes which are on the coming through at the axis. So initially this was the Khazane Wala Rasta was only the one lane, and now this is a very popular craft if you look at the economic augmentation, if you look at the socio-cultural needs of the people, and that is why it has actually spread to 4 of these lanes. And people put down the estimate of people working here to 10 to 15,000 with 500 to 600 workshops here. And the work is not limited here. It also has been shifted out of the city. So you have a lot of work happening there also, and many people working for it. The traditional planning of these lanes included shops on the ground floor and residents on the top. Now, at the time of the making of the cities, the main arterial roads where the buildings were actually made by the state, but these were the lanes where the buildings were made by the people. And even though there were certain guidelines that they had to follow. So you can actually see some uniformity in the lines, the proportions, and some of the language, the elements that were there, within these, The main occupation of these craft person was making Hindu idols or idols of Hindu gods. And that is why if you see them, they were originally they were supposed to be from the Brahmin or the priest community. And depending on the workshop would actually consist of open units where people would work in the front and the finished products were kept at the back. Depending on the size and the space, the craft persons would work sometimes work on the road also. In fact, if we go very early in the morning when the sun is not up, then you can actually see a lot of them working almost on the threshold of their shop and the road, and talking to each other, socializing, and even during the day you will find the neighboring shopkeepers, even if they are doing other craft, they come here, they meet each other and talk about their daily lives and other things. So the craft is not just about their business or a commercial aspect. It's more about the social interactions. It's about a lot of other things which get engaged within that. Now, being one of the most commercially viable craft, which I mentioned before also, there has been a major shift in the business practice. This has become mainly because earlier people used to, come give order for some kind of an idol, and then they would, the craftsman would make them, and then they would collect it. But nowadays the market is about retail. So people want to, see the things firsthand, and they just want to buy it at that time. Now, this has actually prompted a lot of investments, which the craftsmen are not able to afford. And so that has brought in merchants, traders, people who are not actually artisans, but who are, who have money and who know that this business is going very good. Also, with the upscaling of this work, you have a lot of people who have actually come from the neighboring towns, states, villages, who have joined here and who actually do some part processes, and who learn part processes, and they go from one workshop to the other, and working on these part processes. Now, this has led to many things. First, it has led to that the artisans have been pushed from being self-employed to employees of the merchants. So their own identity, their freedom of expression has definitely taken a hit. They are not. In fact, sometimes they don't even get in touch with the patron or the person whom they are making it for. Also, this has led to major transformation in the traditional vocabulary, because from the traditional shops that we saw earlier, now it has all shifted to major showrooms. So from the open shops, which was very much needed for these kind of crafting, because you can't have dust kind of thing happening within closed environment, to coming up with this air-conditioned showrooms, the identity of the area is actually changing over the time. Also, with the need of all these additional storages, the craft has also shifted to all these very small inner lanes. Now, when you look at any historic towns, even though in Jaipur you have all these axial roads, which are the main roads, there are these lot of inner roads where the width is small, and these narrow width leads to the residential areas. So, and this is more like an embedded security, which is always there, within most of these historic areas when you go. But because of the upscaling of the work, because of a lot of storage that they need, because of the crafting that they want to add, crafting people that they want to add to, all these areas have also been encroached. And so the security embedded patterns of the traditional planning have been fragmented, or it has been fractured to an extent. Also, there is a problem with the environment pollution, mainly because earlier they used to have hand tools, but today they are also using power tools because of the the scaling of product, also a lot of technology which has come up. So now, because of the power tools, there's a lot of dust and pollution which actually happens. And after this report which actually came up, the government put their, they brought out a policy that the main roads which are there, which are not going to be, no crafting is going to be done on these main roads. And this has led to the fact that this also has its own implications, that many of these craft persons have actually gone into these narrow lanes, where it is actually becoming more dangerous for them. Also, secondary, lot of this craft work has also shifted to out of the city, because the government allocated them land, and they were shifted to the industrial areas. So a lot of these things have shifted, outside. So now here, instead of a place which was actually having crafting as well as the sale, it has now become more of a retail showroom outlets for the same craft. As I mentioned before, Jaipur is, it was a planned city, and so that is why it has got a lot of these documents on for bylaws, guidelines, way forwards of looking at the built fabric. And though most of this is actually was restricted to the main arterial roads, nowadays it has also been, a lot of initiatives have been taken for these inner roads also, and they are starting out with that. So, and all these do talk about the color and the style and everything. So a lot of detail has been done. I just want to bring is this document, Niti Aayog document. It's a leading Indian organization, and this is a very comprehensive document which talked about the improving heritage management system. So it actually talks about what are the management systems today. It gives examples. It also talks about what is the way forward, what can be done, and what if it has not been done. It also brings up the concept of living heritage. But the only issue is that when we talk about the ICH convention, there is a mention of the ICH convention, there is a mention of using intangible for tourism, but other than that, the overall thrust of this entire thing is on the built fabric. Jaipur, there is a lot of work which is done by independent designers also, so who actually work with this craftsmen within the city, and then they, sell at these kind of very interesting outlets, which are also exported also. Then you have the Indian Institute of Craft Design, which actually brings in craft persons who teach their work to these young professionals, their professional courses which are done. The government is also doing certain, they're trying to get technology and other things for these kind of crafts. So in a way, a lot of work is actually being done. The thing is that we have two conventions. We have the conventions for the tangible and we have the convention for the intangible. So if I look at the craft, when we look at this example, this example basically reveals that, the built fabric of these stone carved lanes is changing due to the change in the practice of that craft. And so it actually shows that even though the built is actually addressed by the bylaws and that intangible gets addressed by the support from the various initiatives, the main problem lies in the disconnection, because both are actually in a way taken care of, but separately, and their aim gets distorted in that. So the container, so my last concluding this thing is that the container is characterized by the content, what is within it, and that is very critical for its management. So maybe it is time we actually start looking at the container through the contained and not vice versa. Most of the time it happens that we actually start working on guidelines and other things and looking at it through the built fabric, and we don't see what is within it, because what is within or what is contained is what is actually changing the outside. So maybe we need to, go the other way around for the same. Change is very important for continuity. When skills need to be, continued, products also need to change, because there are a lot of, and also technological innovations has to happen. The built fabric also has to change to an extent. The craft has to be taken to another level with, the kind of needs that they have today. But the main thing that we need to address is to try to strike a balance between the two for the sustainable heritage management. And that's, I won't say it is an easy task, but yeah, definitely that is what is needed here. And I would end my slide, my presentation, by putting in this last slide. This is actually the Lakh bangle work makers. So they work with Lakh, which is shellac, and this is basically, showing the craft person with his entire family working together. And then you have these visitors who are actually looking at it, though they are asking him to make it, in this way. And it's a very interesting, setting that you actually work in. But the only problem is that even in this craft, from the 35 shops that you see around, it is only this one which actually has stuck to its traditional setting. The rest of them have all become either air-conditioned or otherwise showrooms. And all the work, crafting work, has shifted to the craft people's homes. And yeah, thank you so much.
Wow, you packed so much. My goodness, we could have long discussions on it. Thank you so much, Niyati. And without much delay, we have Shreya Sudesh as our next speaker. Also looking forward to her talk. Shreya is a conservation architect and researcher with experience in post-disaster heritage management and cultural landscapes. Her research focus is oriented towards working on heritage conservation as part of larger sustainable development framework. She believes in experiential learning and is grounded in ethics and social advocacy. She is a compulsive essayist and writes about place attachment, gender issues, and ritual theory. Currently, she is working as an assistant professor at BMS School of Architecture, Bengaluru, and today she is exploring intersections and interdependency of heritage, tangible to intangible case of Indra Jatra, Kathmandu, Nepal. Over to you, Shreya.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you so much. And a good afternoon to everybody. And I will just be sharing my screen immediately. Yeah, right. So thank you for the opportunity, first of all. And as much as I'd like to, yeah, I hope my screen is visible. Yeah. Is my screen visible? Yeah, I think it is. Right. So as much as I'd like to introduce the entire festival to you all, this particular case study and today's presentation will be focusing on the challenges that are faced by the community, by the urban infrastructure, which acts as a frame for the entire festival, and the continuity that comes into place when we talk about such a characteristic festival, because this festival brings in a lot of local belief systems, it brings in traditional knowledge systems, and a lot of rituals and local beliefs. So everything that we are talking about today is somehow contained in this festival, which plays out over 8 days. And it not only celebrates the city of Kathmandu and its people, but also has this very basal primary layer of the indigenous community of the Nevars. So this project started when I was working with Dr. Kaiwaise and Annie Zoshi with the restoration of the Hanuman Dokha Darbar Palace, which actually lies at the center of my study area. So to really understand the challenges, we start looking at this 8-day festival as a cyclical kind of ritual process instead of looking at it as just a celebration. It is celebrated at various scales and has multiple layers and a very dense ritual network. So the challenge really lies in the recording of this kind of data, because we are not only looking at some things at a state level or as a map, but we're also looking at entering each and every courtyard house wherein a certain ritual is associated with this larger festival. So quickly going through what happens is, at the urban level, it is a state festival wherein you have the local government, the representatives, the president, they come in, and there is this whole formal function that takes place on the first day. Then at the community level, you have a lot of belief systems, like suppose there is one very important myth, or you can say legend, of Lord Indra having manifested on in Kathmandu and having been captured. And later, when the people realized that he is indeed a deity, he was taken around the entire city. So this belief system is replayed and reenacted in this city every year. So that is one thing. And then at a very domestic and guthi, which is the traditional organizational level, they again have their own rituals which take place on each of those 8 days. Each family hosts people, and there are these prayers that they do, and then there are these processions. So there's a lot of layering that we are looking at. Quickly moving on to the study area. So towards the right, you can see the Nepal Mandala. And there are two ways of looking at the geography of this place. One is the remains of the physical boundary of Prithvi Narayan Shah, who had annexed the kingdom in the 19th century. But when you start studying more deeply, you kind of understand that the community itself has created a boundary of its own, wherein on the first day of the Jatra, there is a ritual called the Upaku Vanegu, which is practiced by members of the Nevari community who have recently lost somebody or have a deceased member in their family. And so what they do is they walk around the known perimeter. So this known perimeter is something that the community knows of. And so there are around 108 shrines. They could range from a small chaitya to maybe a water spout, which is called the Hiti, or it could be a small shrine to a local deity or an iconic deity. So these are the kind of shrines which are situated at the entire perimeter. If you can see this orange line marked over here. So these people, they would take butter lamps and offerings, and they would visit each of these points of ritual importance on that one night. So this activity, this ritual itself marks a very interesting boundary, and you don't really need to rely on recent historical documents. You can follow the community and understand the boundaries that have existed of and which demarcate the historic core of Kathmandu city. So yeah. And the next, so once we understand what the festival, I mean, I would love to explain what the festival is, but due to the time shortage, yeah. So yeah, so you have the geography, you have this multi-layered festival, and then you have this very dense ritual network that we need to understand. The ritual process, which is cyclical in nature. That is, it does not happen in one phase. You have 3 different phases, as in the beginning, the preparation, and of course the closure that happens. And finally, we will be discussing the urban frame, which kind of supports all of this dense ritual activity. So yeah, this is a map which shows this is a map, and in the center we have the Hanuman Dokha Darbar, which is like the center of all the activity. We need to look at it from a very socio-political way, wherein whichever king or whichever dynasty would take rule, they have to unify all of these components within the region, right? So a jatra or a procession or a festival would kind of unify all of these smaller celebrations into something which could act as the collective identity of the people and the region. And that is how, in the 17th century, the Kumari Rath Yatra, wherein the titular deity of the Malla kingdom, Goddess Taleju, she has so the local belief of the people is that she has manifested as a living goddess who is a child. And her procession is one of the most popular, or one of the most well-known aspects of the Indra Jatra. But what we need to understand is that these larger processions actually kind of bring together the smaller activities, the more indigenous activities, and together they form the Indra Jatra. So it is not one linear way of understanding this. And so in the preparation phase, like almost from a month before the festival season, before the onset of the monsoon, you start seeing all the local community leaders getting together, having meetings, and there are these temporary wooden carts. So carts are these timber structures on which the image of the deity is placed. And then you have certain, and then of course, so this festival, the beginning of the festival is marked by the hoisting of the Indra Dhwaja, or the Linga, or the Yosi, different terms for different communities. And there is a very detailed process of acquiring the timber for this as well. So a group of the community members, they go all the way to Saligrahi forest. There are sacrifices and there's worship. And then they bring down that timber. They literally drag it through all those districts to bring it back into the city. So you see the involvement of the community with the place, with the geography and the festival is one of the most interesting ways of trying to study intangible heritage as such, because there is such interdependency between all of these factors. So yeah, this is one map. So the procession, during those 8 days, there are 3 days wherein the Kumari Rath Yatra has a procession, and that kind of helps you detail the map out a little more. But we need to understand that at all of these junctions that you see, there are these shrines and there are these public spaces which are the center of all the activity that kind of takes place. And yeah. So this is just one example wherein in one of the front yards of the palace of Hanuman Dokha Palace, you will see a lot of these local performances. So these originated by the Jaipur farmers of that time, and they enact deities and demons and tell stories to the local people. So you're reliving the history every year, and it gets refreshed in your mind, and you are close to your tradition for the local people over there. And yeah. So looking at this image, you will see that this is a chowk called the JC Deval. This was there was a temple on this. Right now, only the plinth is visible. Because of the 2015 Gorkha earthquake, the temple was destroyed, but the essence of the space is still remaining. On a regular day, this would be a market square or just a junction. But when the festival plays out, you will see this entire space completely transformed, because the social public space infrastructure of this area has these stages called dabus. It has these structures which are ever present and are lying dormant. But when a festival or an activity takes place, they come back to life. And that is the most important element that we need to record as heritage professionals when we are trying to understand something which is living heritage. And so this is how it looks when it's dormant. But when the festival is alive, you see all of these actors, the viewers, the participants completely engaging with every centimeter of that space. So this is yeah. So and also we need to understand that there is a process and there is a hierarchy that these festivals follow. So I am purposefully not focusing on the larger Yatra, which is more well known. I am focusing on the more local practices. For example, towards your lower right, you can see this is the Akash Bhairav temple. And this temple is usually I wouldn't say dormant, but it's a living temple. But you won't see much activity except maybe the commercial and the public movement. But when the festival begins, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, they start assembling the bust of Akash Bhairav, which is a local deity, right from scratch. You will see hordes of people collecting over there and witnessing for themselves how the local community or the Guthi in that region assemble each and every part of the Akash Bhairav. And this is a tradition that is followed through lineage. Just like that, all of these other performances that we see, the dynamic performances of the demons and the deities, that is the Majipa Lakhe, Pulukishi, who is believed to be the elephant or the Vahan of Lord Indra. And then you have other such deities which add to the myth and the folklore of the entire, it's like seeing a drama play out in the entire city. The city is a host, a stage to this entire narrative. And so all of these, so what we need to remember is that all of these characters, they have their spaces. So when there is no festival around, they have these places called the Guthi Ghars, wherein all of their ceremonial livery, their masks and everything are kept and revered. And these are the spaces where they practice and perform. And then when the final festival comes in, they are all over the streets. But we need to remember that they also require physical space. And through all the community participation, all of the studies that took place, I came to realize that there are so many of these dances because when multiple activities take place, it is very easy to miss that a few activities are actually becoming dormant or are completely removed from the society as such. For example, one major performance called the Kya Pya Kya is no more performed because their Guthi Ghar was destroyed and they could not find the kind of funds or the kind of resources to come back together. So there are hierarchical problems, there are financial things, and then there are urban pressures. So all of these structures that you see in the slide, the stage, which in the second image, it is when on a common day, it is just a platform. But on the day of the Indra Jatra, this is where all the performances take place. Now, this is at a very, very crowded junction. So if the urban pressures are not studied, if these kind of spaces are not listed and kind of protected, or at least made a mention of, then it is very easy to slowly lose the social infrastructure. And so that when the festival comes, it does not have a vessel to play out in. So my entire study was centered upon listing these edifices and these points of ritual importance, and kind of understanding what are the social and urban pressures that this space is facing. For example, again in this image, I'm trying to show you how this space, this falcha is used. This falcha is the structure that you see behind the chaitya. So this is used as a storage place, or maybe you'll see a few elders sitting here in the afternoon. But during the festival, this place is lit with lamps, and these points that you see in the map are exactly the place markers which guide the entire procession. So you have multiple processions happening every day, and these are the spaces which kind of are like milestones for the procession to take place. So the loss of such important place markers can be detrimental to the identity and the essence of the festival as such. And this is very important for the community as well. Then as the festival plays out over the 8 days, there is this whole system of closure that the entire community gets, which is this return in the repose, wherein all of these masks and the livery that was brought out and all of these idols and the images which were brought out are then sent back to their houses as such. And they all have houses. So if you really go into it, the Majipa Lakhe or the particular group of dance performers, they all have their own houses. And throughout the year, they are normal people just like us. But during the festival, they take in the role of the deity. And that is why we need to understand that these spaces, these lesser known spaces, are of much more importance than the more publicly renowned spaces that we see in this region. Another lovely example that I would like to give is this Shaitabhira, and this is present right. It is attached to the Hanuman Dokha Palace. So throughout the year, the image of the deity is hidden behind this wooden lattice, and it is during the Indra Jatra that they kind of grandly open it, and then there are so many rituals associated with it. So even the community and the place has an idea of temporality, and these structures become very important in kind of preserving the idea of the festival as such. This map that you see towards the right is if you just mark all the processional routes and all the points of ritual importance, you see how the city lights up, how the geography itself is ingrained with the ritual process of this entire festival. So through the study, what really came out was there is a need of the representation at grassroots level. So even when they have these meetings and for the management of the festival, the better known processions are given a slight hierarchy over the other communities which need to be represented more. They have smaller organizations, but it is not enough. They need more support. So that can only happen if the first process of listing and identifying them takes place. Secondly, most of these shrines that I spoke about, which are important, are either locally protected or they are part of somebody's yard and things like that. So when this jurisdiction becomes really when it becomes really blurred, then again protection becomes really challenging for the local government. And then we need to understand that this is cyclical in nature, as I mentioned before. So we need to know that it is not only during the festival that we require it, but this protection has to take place around the year with the compliance of the community, because that is exactly how this entire festival works. So quickly wrapping it up, the idea of locating what is endangered at all of these levels was very important in the study. This is still an ongoing research, but the whole idea of community outreach, which is working wonderfully in Kathmandu right now, is also very important. So when we talk about intangible heritage related to festivals and celebrations, it's very easy to get to sideline all of these lesser known facets of heritage, but it is our duty to kind of understand them and to kind of find the voice that they don't require a voice, of course, but to kind of bring out the value of these smaller structures which add in to the identity of the festival itself. So yeah, that is exactly what I wanted to present today. Thank you.
So sorry to be rushing everyone, but I mean, these are so fascinating, and it's such a, in a way, advantage for us to be able to hear stories and these observations from across our neighbors. I mean, thank you, Shreya, wonderful. Now, we have come to the end of presentation part of it, and we are exactly 30 minutes behind schedule. So this is the time I get the privilege to actually interact with each of our speakers on everybody else's behalf. And we slip into panel discussion, which let's see if we can get our speakers to switch on their cameras and be with us. Thank you. Dr. Fauzia, are you there? May I request you to switch on your cameras, please? And I would invite one question before I begin, from each of our speakers to the other speaker. If you have any thoughts that you would like to immediately that comes up as an observation or as a thought, because it's also, I've noticed that the speakers never get a chance to talk to their co-speaker or a co-panelist. So Dr. Fauzia and Neil, if you would like to initiate any conversation between, and Shen, this is your chance before I begin.
Yeah, if I may start, not a question per se, but just an observation that I would like to put forward is, across these presentations, I think there was one message that I would like to highlight, that the way we need to understand the intangible cultural heritage is that it's living heritage, and it is it has evolved by changing as per the time and the context and all that. And that's very important for us to understand. When you talk about safeguarding, it's not as if we're freezing it and putting it in some silos of time and past, but it's actually letting the change happen. And I think Desan very nicely brought it out, whether you connect it to the disasters or, as Zaya was saying, perhaps you can connect it to the contemporary urban planning processes and what we do with the cities. So I think this livingness is something we need to really emphasize. And I think all the presentations, Niyati did that. We saw that in Lahore as well, because that's how it connects to people. And if you don't connect to the people, then intangible cultural heritage is no more there. So just an observation I wanted to say. Thanks.
Dr. Fawzia, your thoughts?
Oops, I was muted, sorry. I think we had some wonderful presentations, and the linkages between all the presentations were really, as it was summed up in one of the earlier presentations, was how to link the tangible and intangible tracks. And the important thing was looking at the verb, creator of the environment, collaboration between regimes where people can connect. I think the verb is the critical aspect of how we can connect tangible and intangible, and it becomes something of it becomes whole. It becomes a whole, and I think all the presentations really did stress on this as to how to connect the intangible with the tangible. The presentation from Bhutan and from Nepal, and of course Jaipur too, were really looking at the changes that are taking place over time, and yet the strength of the intangible really overtakes the tangible. And it is indeed sad that when we look at the tangible and the focus on tangible brings about more of a I suppose destruction is too harsh a word to use, but it does really. And I think looking at our cultural traditions is something which is very, very significant. And in some of our larger cities, we seem to be losing them. I can say that definitely in the case of Lahore.
And that brings me to Shen. I mean, I was really touched once again by her very simply put that if it is relevant, it will have a continuity. Shen, what did you think, and any thoughts on other presentations that you saw? Would you like to comment or say something before I slip in?
Sorry, excuse me.
Not at all. You're very welcome. Yeah, very good.
So, yeah. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, a little louder would be
okay.
Nice. Yeah.
First of all, I would really like to thank all the other presenters. And since my focus really is on disaster risk management, overall disaster risk management, so specifically focusing on the cultural heritage for this session was very interesting. And I got to learn a lot from all the other speakers. And like you have seen in my CV that I used to work very specifically on cultural heritage. So this has been a very interesting a moment to reconnect very strongly with cultural heritage again. I really don't have a question, but as just an additional comment from my side, as I listened to all the presentations, with the word of innovation being very important for anything now, I was thinking that even in cultural heritage, because whatever we talk about intangible or tangible cultural heritage, we are conserving it to pass it down to our next generations, our children. So unless they see value in it, there is not much hope in it. So therefore, the important point is that we need to inculcate that value of understanding why cultural heritage is important, so that they see it. Because even I think our generation, just 10 years after us, the perspectives we have, the way we live our life, our daily lives, our priorities in life are so different that I think the things that interest us doesn't interest them. because now everything is changing with technologies advancing so fast. So therefore, coming back to this innovation of making cultural heritage an integral part of our lifestyles, I think we should, while we really focus on conserving what we have, both tangible and intangible, there should also be, it's also very important to focus on how do we disseminate these values through maybe, I don't know, social media, that also what kind of messages and, the way of messaging, what kind of videos or what kind of, what kind of, festivals, or how does youth like to come together to see the intangible part of it. I think tangible is not so complicated because it's something that you can actually visually see, but then the intangible part is the little bit of the complexity part which can get easily lost. So therefore, it's really an important time where we also now start need to focusing on how do we make messages that are relevant to the way our youth thinks, using all the social platforms that are now available. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. So that really brings me to my sort of query to Neil. When we look at the cities that are vying for World Heritage, should they also look at 2003 ICH Convention? Or would it create an issue, or would it complement the World Heritage designation? As we are just discussing that something is changing and something is staying, but the relationship, and Niyati's presentation really brought that out, that there is a symbiotic relationship between the container and the contained. So how does one address this, and is 2003 ICH Convention the right way?
Is that to me, Poonam?
Yes, Dr. Neil, yes.
Okay, thank you. That actually ties up with, I just saw in the chat box, Dennis Rodwell has a question, very important question, and supplementary information as well. I think these are two connected things. In my presentation in a rush, I also try to indicate that actually if we go back to history, the Venice Charter, which is supposed, which is blamed to be, promoting this authenticity-based, material-based approach, actually in its preamble doesn't actually say that. It actually recognizes that, there is tradition, there is, the culture behind it. And Dennis here comments that actually in the French version of the Venice Charter, there is the mention of spirituality. I think he says that that is somehow missed in the English translation. That's something I didn't know. So thank you, Dennis, for bringing that up. But that actually connects that how over time as we evolve as a heritage field, I think we perhaps did disservice to the sector by creating these silos. And I think over the course of time, and perhaps in my opinion, and I think Dennis is hinting, that the World Heritage Convention gave this notion, and all the governments, the member states picked it up very strongly for whatever reason. And I think that's where, if you look at the history of the discourse, you will see the dissonance also started to happen, right? So, but that's kind of silent. And all of a sudden you see in 2003, a big convention coming out, ICH. Now, I think that's the dilemma that we entered in. Now, instead of, and I think Dennis is also arguing the same thing, that instead of World Heritage, even though it was trying, cultural landscape came, the HUL came, all NARA document helping out with the demystification of the authenticity, all this happening. I think what we missed out was we missed out the core message that was there, that, okay, let's consider the dynamics of the people and the culture and the traditions. I think that was missed out. But it's a pity that, under UNESCO itself, these are two instruments that have come out. I noticed earlier, I think Joe from ECROM had a comment that, the mistake that UNESCO did. I fully agree with that. I think, so we have actually taken it to the wrong direction. I mean, I can understand the dynamics, the diplomacy, whatever happens on that. But coming back to your questions, if Kathmandu Valley has 5 World Heritage cities, World Heritage properties rather, why on earth we are missing out on also looking at like what Shreya presented, these wonderful festivals, which actually allows you to understand the urban planning principles. And we're now nowhere connecting to that principle when we are thinking of road widening or bringing it another ring road, or sort of, running another fast track road through some of our traditional cities, So this is the mistake. So you are absolutely right, Poonam. I think while waiting for the big things to happen, the small things that city like Jaipur or Kathmandu or Ahmedabad can do is to also look at this other instrument. I mean, if nothing else we can do, let's also bring that instrument in. Let them sort of I mean, if it has to collide, let them collide. I think it's for our benefit that they collide and they sort of got into trouble. But I think we should do not hesitate to bring in this instrument that highlights an ICH and bring them forward and work. But by saying that, I'm not saying that we always need to look at these global instruments. I think at the local level, we should be able to work with our own instruments. And this is where, towards the end of my presentation, I wanted to connect. Perhaps the biggest lesson that this ICH convention gives is the focus on people, their participation, their consent, right? And that's the lesson. So if you bring that lesson, then it leads toward people-centric approach, which is also not like a panacea, like it will solve everything, but that's an approach, that's a mindset. So I agree, Poonam, that perhaps that's the way that historic towns should approach, that they should not get stuck into one or the other. They should think, what is the dynamics in my city and how does it move forward? Whether by preserving or changing. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. But it also raises, and I'm now opening it to Niyati. What do you think of the socio-economic conditions of the craftsmen? I mean, human beings are aspirational. I mean, when we look at the culture part of it, culture is not something static. To my mind, the conflict is not as much. I mean, there is no surprise for me, in a way, as a practitioner, that there is a conflict that keeps coming because something is static and the other is dynamic. Culture in itself is dynamic, it is changing, people are open to change, people need to change. And so trying to conserve something that is dynamic will really need something else. And that's why the fact of relevance is one part of it. But let me Jaipur Wall City becomes a fantastic context for us, because here we have, and we have seen, and thank you for such detailed presentation of the living conditions, of the working conditions on the street, on the veranda, between things, and how it is transitioning. Is aspiration a bad thing for people who are living in historic environment? Or what is it, has it improved? I mean, it did look very clean. My memory of 20 years back is very different from, so I must say that it seems to have changed. And the fact that the crafts are the living intangible heritage that are intimately connected with the built fabric. Now, with exponential increase in population, are the living conditions comparable with the one that we say is acceptable for human beings? You know, we have these codes coming in, national building codes which specify certain square meters, certain spaces. So how are these two, especially in Southeast Asia? I think we need to take that ball forward, that our numbers are more, our spaces are less, and we are very, very rich culturally. So how do you see it being charging force? Where do you see the charters and ICH conventions and the world conventions keeping us awake? You're on mute, Niyati.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you for the question. And there are many different, aspects to all this, which obviously in 10 minutes I could not say everything. But on one side you have the craft, which is actually, the augmentation of craft is happening. But at the same time, because of these traders and merchants and other people coming in, the craft persons have the augmentation of themselves is not happening at that level. So even though they do have aspirations and they have their own this thing, but because of a lot of other things, one is obviously the investments, the kind of systems that have changed from that made to order to retail things, where they are not able to, get in so much money and things. And then you have a lot of these, I won't say poachers exactly, but people who are very good businessmen who know where to put their money in. So they actually get into all this and they take it up, forward. And so in that case, that basic system has entirely changed. So it's, we have to look at, okay, we look at craft augmentation also, but then at the same time, what happens to the craftsmen also? Are they actually also going forward? Or are they actually still stuck at that level? And there also, there are more complexity to it because of a lot of awareness issue also, education issues also, even though Jaipur, like I said, that it's a perfect example where a lot of institutions are even still doing their work and designers also are coming forth. But what happens that even with the designers, what happens that they do get some work done from these people. They take it to the design shops and then it is exported or it is sold in, you know, God knows what money to somebody else. So it doesn't even, you know, these people don't have any contact to their patrons or other things also. And so that doesn't work. As far as the craft people are themselves concerned, because of all this happening and also because of now a lot of money coming into, because of the normal workshops becoming multi-storied showrooms and everything, and a lot of, the price rise because of that. So these people are now pushed outside. So it has become that they are either they are into these lanes or they are pushed outside. They normally, they have shifted outside, they come here on cycles or whatever, and because they are not able to afford the rent or even the price of this. So it's a very complex situation, which I don't know where we can, not one place where we can, you know, put our foot head on. Yeah.
Is it really, do you think conservation architects and engineers are the right people to be addressing it, or this needs to become a broader framework of sociologists, anthropologists to come in, and more so the labor departments and the planning, the human. I think this is, we need to also, I think, somewhere draw a line what we can do and what we can't really handle because we are not really equipped to really, and we can maybe flag the issues and then hand it over to another. What do you think? Is that another way of recognizing our own limitations of empowering other people rather, and not our, that it's beyond us? Or do you think there will be people?
Yeah, I think I maybe am not that big at this thing to say this, but yes, I do think that, you know, there are these sociologists or other people who need to come in. The very reason being that, like I was saying, when we talk about the social infrastructure or even the space that we are talking about, building codes. So when we talk about traditional planning, it is not only about, you know, the spaces and whether they are clean enough for everything. It's also about the social structure, because the community which stayed together, they used to stay upstairs. They had all these inner lanes. So from that big wide road to when you go into the inner lanes, you have automatically get into a secured situation, which now doesn't happen. So that entire thing gets fragmented because of, you know, just one reason, which is craft practice. So, and that is why I kept the whole presentation on that only one thing changed in this entire craft, but that changed the entire, you know, things which you actually don't see on the front. If I go as a visitor, I see everything as it is. But when you actually start talking to people and you realize there are a lot of competitions which have come in because of this investment and the money and everything, and because of people shifting out. So you have this other people from other states who are just staying upstairs. Now, when they are staying on the upstairs, they are not interested in what kind of, whether that built fabric has any, you know, whether it is taken care of or not. So these renters are not going to. So there are a lot of these places there in Jaipur where you can actually see that there are huge havelis where there are 100 people staying there. And these 100 people have no owners to, you know, take care of the haveli. So there are all these, so it will have to be a very, very large framework. I don't know how it can be done, but yes, it will need a very large framework to,
Wonderful. So this ties up, Dr. Fawzia, maybe see you, please. This is something that your presentation, are you there, Dr. Fawzia?
Yes, I'm here. I had to mute my video because of the. I'll just come back on.
That's fine.
Essentially,
so I wanted to bring in this aspect of and ask you. You know, this is again in terms of Lahore, what we saw that it is historically multi-ethnicity narrative that you have presented. Can on-site museum play a role? And can specifically employing historical photographic records, personal stories, and then employing digital technology, perhaps to create parallel narratives? So I'm wondering if how are you in Lahore addressing the vanished original communities and yet a continuity of the sentiments.
I'm sorry, I didn't get much of it. My internet probably is a bit unstable. But I get a gist of your question. The issue really is more to do with it's more of a planning issue, I think. We find that the city is not geared to make culture the center stage, and particularly the craftsmen. When we say that the craftsmen have moved out, and you have these big businesses and wholesalers moving in, like what Niyati said too, that you have craftsmen, but for them the amount of income that they can generate with the middlemen coming in and the big businesses coming in and the big cloth marketeers coming in, you find that from the inner city, these small businesses and they are moving out, and you have a whole new set of people coming in. It really does become more of a planning issue, where I feel whilst we are coming up with management plans for our cities, culture and the sociology and the anthropology of people has to be center stage more than what, and the economists. For instance, economists don't look at culture as something which is center stage. For them, it is number crunching. It is where can we, where is it that we can generate more income? And culture in the sense, when we look at craftsmen or we look at small businesses, or we look at that is just not taken into consideration. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure whether I understood your question very well. And I'm sorry, I've got my video off because of the my unstable.
So that's fine. Yeah. I was wondering if you had any examples from Lahore, where how to remember the people who have left, and how you were dealing with this, because your presentation did bring out the fact that there is a lost sense of people left, people gone, and communities have become binary rather than multiple. So is there a way that one can address the lost memories?
The lost memories are being brought back primarily through the tangible. There is a certain nostalgia. We're using tourism as a, where we have pantomimes. Really, culture is now if we look at it from the perspective of what is happening in Lahore at the moment, is more of a pantomime, because we have tourist, we have remakes of festivals, we have remakes of dances, but the original form of the original culture is disappearing very quickly. And that's sad. It's not that the Lahorites do not are not nostalgic about their past. There is a certain nostalgia, and therefore there is this thrust amongst the beyond the walled city, where people do throng to this inner city area, but they come in as tourists. And maybe tourism will bring back a certain amount of the older trades or so on, but they will not be in the sense of how it was integrated as part and parcel of the life that it was. And yes, culture is an evolving thing, and yes, it is going to change. So I think we're going to be left behind with a lot of changes, particularly in the urban areas, in urban cities like Lahore. They will become more of places where where culture would be used for tourism purposes, as shows, as pantomimes. not in the true sense of what what the lifestyle originally was.
Thank you for that. Yeah, makes me sad. But at the same time, I look at Nepal and Shreya bringing this amazing story of spaces and festival and belief systems. So how do the various layers of the festival really come together during these 8 days of festival? I mean, if you can tell us briefly about it, what is it that keeps it going, and how does it come together? And do you think it will remain like that, or and I mean, remember, Neil is right here, huh? So what are your thoughts? Yeah.
From my understanding, yeah. From my understanding, when we look at the various layers, like I stated, the larger state-led festivals which are funded by the state or larger organizations, they are going to go pretty smoothly because there is a different idea behind the continuity of these festivals. But it is these local, the layer which is the base layer with the indigenous communities and the celebrations which are maybe starting from their own house and then spreading into the street and then the city. That is exactly what requires more importance. And one of the comments also measured that, these processes that I mentioned of listing and maybe kind of documenting. So that is because the purview of my study was the spatial manifestation of the festival. But if I were to talk about trying to understand the layers of the living heritage, then we need to, not one toolkit could probably suffice in documenting such heritage, because these layers, they exist. If you look at the maps, if you layer all the 8 maps that I had created of those 8 days, you will see that there is an order in the chaos which only the local community understands. That me as a researcher or thousands of us going from India to see, we would never know. We would be running behind like, okay, we would need somebody to tell us. But within themselves, they are wonderfully organized with what is happening. But the problem really is that all this knowledge is passed down as through the lineage. So if there is any missing aspect in this very fragile network, then a lot can be lost, as it has been lost. There are a lot of studies which will and they are not published studies, but when you go and speak to the communities, you go to each guthi, you go to each bahal, and you speak to those people, the elders will tell you that earlier there were so many number of performances, but right now it's come to like a handful of them. So the idea of recording live heritage again is a big challenge for, I think, all South Asian countries as such. So the layers coexist. The community knows how it works, but then again, things are changing, and we need to understand how to really record it to kind of keep the continuity going on and the essence or the identity of the Indra Jatra to be more original than what the state kind of professes it to be about the processions only. It's not just about the procession; it is also about everyone coexisting together. So yeah, that's something. Yeah.
So in a way, interpretation of cultural heritage, whether it's for tangible or for intangible, seems to have a similar challenge, because either the communities are missing of whose memories they are, or the practitioners are not inaccessible, or are making a presentation or telling about it, and mainly, as Dr. Fawzia also tells us, that this is geared up to be towards more tourist oriented, and this we have also. This is one of the issues. Anyways,
if I may add to this, yeah. So I think one of the things I'd like to add on to what Shreya was just saying is that we need to also understand that these intangible heritage are not just traditions and practices that are there. There is a genesis of knowledge behind it and the practice, which I would like to call as a system, right? So when you connect this to, say, the knowledge systems, the indigenous knowledge systems and all that. In Kathmandu, Shreya also mentioned in passing that guthi is a very important concept, and that we need to understand. It's a system, okay? And all these processions are happening because of the guthi, and guthi is it's a very complex thing to understand. We cannot describe it, but there is this concept of guthi, which is an institution in itself. It's a practice. It's a cultural practice. It's also the network. So many layers. So this word guthi is probably a mind that will explain many of these things. Unfortunately, I think in the modern system, modern Nepal after 1950s, when we came up with the Department of Archaeology and the Ancient Monuments Protection Act, and then there is also Guthi Act, I think we have somehow disjointed the traditional guthi concept with the new guthi concept. and these kind of mistakes have happened. But the Guti is the key behind all these things. That's something I just wanted to add and highlight here. Thanks.
So it's very interesting, and that makes me think. And Shen, I just came to know that Bhutan doesn't have any ICOMOS as an organization, and I'm wondering that these charters. So, and you are very much active with the disaster risk management. Definitely, you would be part of also the ICORP, or maybe just you're definitely. We know you. We have heard about you, about your work. And so is the case with all our South Asian countries. Do we really need to relook at how or what guidelines we use, or do we need to create particular guidelines for different places? How do you see it? And I'd like Tushen to start and give us some idea as to how does it work in Bhutan?
Yeah, in Bhutan, we don't have any cultural heritage sites as such that is registered with as international cultural heritage at the moment. I think there are initiatives going on, but then I am not very familiar in that area in terms of registering cultural heritage sites, so I would not go into that area. In terms of guidelines, I'm not very familiar with the international guidelines there that are in place, but then I think coming down to the local use and then making it practical in every country or in every community itself. Even I think the role and responsibility may lie with the central agency, for example, in Bhutan, the Department of Culture, to be well familiarized with international guidelines on cultural heritage conservation. But then what is more important that brings about the involvement of the communities who are the owners of the cultural heritage is having the capacity within the government or the local governments to translate the intrinsic meanings within those guidelines into a local, into a level where local communities can understand. And I don't think right now, maybe that is one of the gaps where how people perceive conservation of cultural heritage. For example, I think while now the situation is improving with a lot of awareness programs going on, that because in Bhutan, cultural heritage would, the first thing you would think about is the dzongs, which are called the fortresses, and the temples and monasteries, because those are what you see architecturally rich and, you know, artifacts and everything that that are considered as cultural heritage. So there is this a challenge of convincing the owners of these sites in terms of conserving what you have, and for them to put forward their needs and changing things as per to suit the evolving needs. So therefore, striking that balance, I think now that it has really progressed in Bhutan, that, you know, there are cultural heritage management plans being prepared. So it is trickling down to the main users. But I think the work shouldn't stop there, and we still need to really work towards raising more awareness in terms of what values really mean when we talk about cultural heritage. But at the same time, like Dr. Neil was saying, I think understanding that cultural heritage is living heritage when we talk about people involved in it. So therefore, the whole evolution of what can be what can change, what really cannot be changed, like, you know, where do you really say, like, this is the stand we take, but then, okay, from here, there's a little bit of flexibility that can be changed to accommodate the needs of the main users. I feel that when that becomes clear, then both sides of people who are really working on the conservation aspect, plus those who are actually the users of the structures or whatever that we are trying to conserve comes on the same platform. So maybe it's important to work on those guidelines really at the local level as well for us to take this work forward. I don't know if that answers to your question.
It's interesting. I mean, I think, what do you think, Neil? I would like Neil to, Dr. Neil, would you like to react to that? From Nepal?
No, I listening to this, and I had the privilege of working in Bhutan for some time in the beginning of this millennium. I would say, you know, Bhutan not having any of its sites into the World Heritage List, wonderful. Please stay like that, because you have wonderful concepts like the HNY and the you know, the happiness and all that. So I think come up with those your own approaches than going by this route, because I think as has been discussed earlier, somehow we created these artificial divides and all that, and have lost the sight of what really is the heritage. We have lost the processes. Like in Kathmandu, Shreya highlighted, we have wonderful World Heritage sites nominated in the very early stage of World Heritage Convention. But what happened to our intangible? We have not seen the connection. So I think I know what you also hinted. There have been processes going on both on the ICH part and the World Heritage part. But I think my feeling is perhaps Bhutan in South Asia is the one who understands the heritage better than any of us. So please keep up your spirit and tell us or show us the way. I would rather say that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree.
I'll definitely convey the message to my colleagues who actually work in the department.
This is one of the best things that Bhutan's gift to the rest of the world, and hope we can all aim for it. We can continue this.
I just have a point to make here. May I?
Yes, please go ahead,
Yeah.
Dr. Fauziya.
The religion plays a very critical role, and I think what is happening in Nepal, the case studies that we saw there, it was primarily religion which was gearing and keeping that aspect of culture very much alive. In Lahore, for instance, in the case of walled city of Lahore, the aspect which is still very alive and very much there ingrained is the whole Muharram procession. Muharram is something that is not celebrated or look, it's a very much part of our Shia culture, but celebrated by the Shia sect of her. And within the walled city, we have a number of sites from where the people gather from various havelis and various centers, like the Nisar Haveli and there are quite a few, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the names, and how the procession really walks through the walled city. And for those 10 days, the walled city really becomes a very security alert place, where this particular processions are allowed to pass through and go up to Karbala Gamisha. So that's only in those 10 days. And that's a religious procession, and that is very much still part and parcel of the walled city. I had a question here where they said where somebody mentioned, do you feel Lahore is moving towards cities museumization as well? I think that was a point that I'd made very clear in my presentation as well as in my earlier comment.
Yeah. So. Yes, that's why I didn't pose it to you. I thought we had already answered that. I would like to bring this afternoon to now to conclusion and take 2 minutes to give the concluding remarks. This is something that it's a very big subject, and that's why we have another 4 afternoons to look forward to address the ICH. Exciting, very exciting, because we have all felt the need, but now we are finding the means. And so to sum up in a way, Dr. Neil helped us to understand the importance of ICH in urban heritage conservation. He gave us a brief historical background, and then through the various case studies established for us the challenges in concepts and its application. He also shared with us his ideas on the way forward to achieve a more inclusive conservation management plans for tangible heritage in urban context, and to be aware to not overthink it. Professor Fauziya illustrated post-partition impact on Lahore city, which was once a cultural hub of multi-ethnicity glimpsed now only in its built fabric. Outward migration of Hindus and Sikhs residents changed the social and cultural fabric. Along with the rural-urban migration to the city, terrorism and globalization of the past 75 years has had an impact not only on the land use patterns of the inner city, but has transformed the intangible practices and rituals. Her presentation brought forward the importance of understanding the link between the physical and the socio-economic transformation processes in historic city. It has been our privilege to understand the challenges that no charter can equip us to resolve with ease. Our speaker from Bhutan has given us more things to think about. She gave us insight, Mr. Chen, and has given insight into intangible cultural heritage that can directly impact the resilience aspect, and it is a vital. The very fact, I mean, I was really taken aback by the idea of a candle and the fire in a building, and that really creates a lot of relationship that we have not really looked into. Where to look at threats, how to look at threats. These are the daily practices, and we never really looked at them as could be the vulnerability aspects within a cultural fabric. And I thank you for that, for bringing out those dynamics and desirable changes, such as the link between the lamp and the fire and the threats. And also for specifying again and again that what we value, we preserve, and the link is in making the practices relevant in the present to ensure their continuity. That's really about managing the change with certain responsibility. Architect Niyati Jigyasu drew our attention to the fact that the historical narratives of a city demonstrate the existence of traditional crafts which are related to availability of materials, socio-cultural needs, and political strategy. Now, in this political strategy, I really mean to say that planning and political strategies have somehow intertwined, and we are not recognizing these as much in professional circles or not have enough means to address them. This has also come up in Lahore. The political will, the planning, and the socio-cultural history, and how we want to perceive and portray a city has gone beyond the understanding in the framework of culture and cultural heritage. The changing economics, traditional livelihoods, and living conditions appear to be common threads running through the case of historic cities. And the research, her research as well, finding advocate looking at heritage management to the tangible through the intangible, and perhaps she stresses, very importantly, not vice versa. And that is another debate. I think there can be a webinar only on that aspect to challenge and to really explore what would it mean. Architect Shreya, what a breath of fresh air, dissected the festival of Indrajatra through its various layers to examine dimensions of time, place, community, and performance, to explore the interdependence of intangible heritage on historic core of Kathmandu in a very, very humble way. She shared with us the spatial manifestation of the elaborate rituals of the festival, and that she mapped through the various stages and found them to be in accordance and closely related to hierarchical and temporal structures of the festival. Couldn't have been easy as not being from the community or less of from the community. Never is easy. Her research established for us linkages between communities, religious rituals, and the urban forms at historic core of Hanumankot, Doka, Darbar Square of Kathmandu. It's been a privilege to be with you all this afternoon. I hope I have done justice to your very wonderful sharings. And if I have missed out a few points and a few questions, do please get back to me and we can have a discussions. And excuse me for missing out on some of the questions somewhere, but I think we have had a very enriching and engaging afternoon. And I think if something can make us think a little more, we have already achieved something, and I will be continuing to think. So with that, I take your leave, and thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Poonam. You've been just wonderful in summing up everything. And it has been really an honor and a pleasure to be with such a distinguished list of speakers. I want to thank all of you, and especially ICOMOS India for giving me this opportunity.
Really nice to hear you again, Dr. Percy, after a very long time, but it's been a pleasure. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Over
everyone.
to the organizing team, Kanika, or who's coming?
Madam, I'm taking over.
Yeah.
Sukrit, I'll request you to share the presentation poster. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We'll just wait for Sukrit. Right. So with this, we have come to the end of session 1. Today was a highly engaging session on the theme of intersections and interdependencies, tangible to intangible interactions, contestations and challenges in historical towns. Now I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Neil, Professor Dr. Foizia, Ms. Deshen, Niyati Jigyasu, and Ms. Shreya Sudesh. Thank you for the wonderful presentations. I would also like to thank Poonam Verma for moderating the session 1 and Ma'am Reena Huja, Vice President, for her opening address. I would also take the opportunity to thank our partner institutes, Department of Architecture, Planning and Design from IIT BHU, Center of Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, for extending their support and guidance in designing this series. I extend a special thanks to Sir Naveen Piplani, President ICOMOS India, for his support. I also thank ICOMOS Executive Council, Professor Arun Menon, NSC Councillor, Madam Shalini Dasgupta, Secretary ICOMOS India, and Priyanka Madam for their support and guidance. Lastly, I thank the organizing team for today, Ms. Lipika Khanna, Ms. Zarna Shah, Sukrit Sen, Kritika, Meenal Singh, Varsha, Saranya Darshini from EPWG, ICOMOS India, Sukanya, Lakshmi, and others, all of who have been working relentlessly, in making this event come together. So thank you everyone for sharing your work and making this session a success. And we would extend the invitation to everyone to join us for the session 2, which will be discussing the theme of tools and strategies, the role of intangible cultural heritage in sustainability of historic towns, scheduled on 27 June 2021. We look forward to your participation, and we wish you all be safe, be healthy. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yes, please.
Can we request the core team to stay on, please?